What if I told you one of Europe's biggest motorcycle brands is now facing claims that some of its bikes may have been sold in a way that made them road legal on paper, but not road legal in the real world? An investigation claims that one de-restricted Enduro bike from this brand produces more than 10 times the pollution of the approved restricted version. And that same investigation claimed that many of those bikes have been being sold de-restricted directly to customers from the dealerships after they leave the factory. Most of us think of Dieselgate as a car thing. It was a huge story back in 2015. Volkswagen admitted millions of diesel cars have been fitted with software designed to recognise when they were being emissions tested. During the tests, those emissions were massively reduced, but out on the road they were much higher. It became one of the biggest scandals in automotive history and cost Volkswagen billions. But now, some people are asking the very uncomfortable question, could motorcycling have its very own Dieselgate moment? And if it does, what could the consequences of that be? Now, I'll be really honest here, I'm not an Enduro rider. I'm not the bloke smashing through the forest on a Husqvarna covered in mud, living his best Graham Jarvis fantasy. I'm more likely to be stood at a bike meet, drinking a nice cup of coffee, pretending to understand suspension setups and stuffing my face with a pastel donate or two, because who can resist a Portuguese tart? But we've all seen this culture around bikes. It's technically for track use only culture. It's in every facet of the industry. Loud, de-restricted exhausts, remaps, flipped plates, or even running with no plates. And most of the time, riders like myself will treat that as harmless. It's a little bit naughty maybe, but it's normal and perceived to be normal across the culture. But what happens when that attitude starts to filter up to the manufacturers themselves? Who's liable for the consequences? So here's what's actually being reported. We've got a cross-border investigation called Unrestricted, and it involves climate whistleblowers and several major European media outlets, including, well, I'll put some names on the screen right now because there's a few to mention. They claim that certain KTM Enduro models were approved for road use in the restricted form, but they were commonly de-restricted by authorised dealers before customers even took delivery. The investigation says that reporters visited dealerships and trade shows across several countries, including the UK, and were told that bikes were routinely de-restricted. This investigation came about after one salesperson let slip that KTM's off-the-shelf bikes were passing emissions tests, but they were instructed to immediately remove the restrictions after the passing of the motorcycle, or it just wouldn't work. Now, one of the publications actually ran a quote from the salesperson that sparked all of this within their story, and that quote read, "All our motorcycles come restricted as standard, but we have to remove the restrictions for the engines to work properly. KTM delivered them with a different exhaust system, and we immediately changed the configurations. The restricted mode is just to pass European tests and anti-pollution standards." Now, KTM obviously completely rejects the allegation that it's placing illegal motorcycles in the market. And they went out and put out a statement, which you can see behind me, which says that its Enduro models leave the factory in a road-legal homologated condition. It says any conversion for competition use happens after purchase, at the customer's request, and the riders are told that the road approval then expires. But the investigation report goes even further and states that whilst these bikes leave the factory with emissions restrictions to control just how much carbon dioxide is emitted from them, and it will run for the emissions tests, you cannot ride the bikes directly from factory. The investigation alleges that the restricted calibration makes the bike perform so poorly that dealers routinely remove the restrictions before customers even ride them. And it goes even further, alleging that this wasn't simply the dealers acting on their own, but that the practice was being driven from much higher up within KTM. So the whole story now sits on one key question. Were these bikes being modified after a rider bought them for private competition use? Or were they effectively being sold to customers already in a non-road legal state, while the paperwork still said they were road legal? Because if it's the latter, that is potentially a massive industry scandal. Now let's look at that word homologation. That just means that the bike is approved and meets certain rules around noise, emissions, safety and road use. For Enduro bikes, this gets quite messy because these bikes have to live in two separate worlds. They're designed to be competition machines, but they also need to be road approved because Enduro riders often use public roads and highways to get between trails and sections of green lanes and stuff. So KTM's argument is that basically these are sports machines. They are delivered legally, but they can be converted for competition and to get better performance. And that is completely normal in this industry. And to be fair, that part makes complete sense. A road legal enduro bike being converted for competition use is not automatically suspicious. The problem is what the investigation claims happens in practice. The report says dealers describe the restricted setup as something mainly used as a tick box exercise to pass approval, not as the form customers will actually receive their bike in. So KTM can say the factory sends out legal bikes, and that may be true, but the investigation focuses heavily on what happens at dealer level. If the dealer modifies a bike after it arrives and before the customer takes it home, who's responsible? Is it the dealer? Is it the customer? Or is it the manufacturer? And this is the grey area that we're now looking at. If the factory says, well, we're supplying the bikes legally, and the dealer then says, well, we were told to do this work by the manufacturer, and the customer says, well, that's just how the bike comes, then they can all carry on pointing fingers at each other like that stupid Spider-Man meme where they're all... Now, I know what some of you guys as viewers will say, that it's a tiny number of bikes and who really cares? And that is a fair challenge because KTM themselves even said that European Enduro models make up around 3% of its global sales. Industry experts consulted by the investigators estimated that KTM may sell up to 10,000 de-restricted motorcycles annually across Europe. According to figures supplied by motorcycle data specialist MCD, that equates to just 0.59% of all motorcycles sold across the continent last year. It becomes even smaller still when you draw that comparison against the wider transport sector. Measured against annual passenger vehicle sales across Europe, the estimated number of potential non-conforming KTMs represents just 0.08% of powered transport. Now also consider the minuscule mileage most enduro bikes cover throughout their life cycle, and it really does start to look like a drop in the ocean. So no, this isn't the same scale as millions of diesel cars like it was with VW. But scale really isn't the only issue. The International Council on Clean Transport, or the ICCT for short, commissioned a test, and they reportedly found that unrestricted KTM enduro bike emitted more than 10 times the pollutions of the approved restricted version. Le Monde reported carbon monoxide was around 20 times higher. This is a huge gap between what the bike is certified as and what it may actually be doing out on the road. Now, we all know riders have a public image problem. Noise complaints, green lane closures, public anger, and councillors and campaigners looking for reasons to restrict access, etc., etc. So even if this only affects a small part of the motorcycle industry, the reputational damage of this can spill over onto all of us. And this is where I think that riders like myself and you guys need to be a little bit more careful, because it's easy to react by saying something like, who cares? Let people ride what they want to ride. I totally get that. None of us want to feel like the fun sponge when reporting on stuff like this. But the problem is, if manufacturers operate in this grey area, then the riders can often be the ones that are left holding the bag. Because imagine you go and spend £12,000 on a bike from an authorised dealer. You assume everything is legal. You assume the insurance is correct. You assume the paperwork matches the motorcycle and what it's designed to do. Most riders wouldn't even think to question that. But if these allegations turn out to be true, that's what bothers me the most. So now I want to ask you guys, that if a dealer sells a bike that has already been de-restricted, as it's the only way to actually make it work properly, who should be responsible? Is it the dealership? Is it the manufacturer at top level? Or is it the rider who buys the bike? Let me know in the comments, because I think this is the whole issue that we're talking about here. Not just what happened, but who gets blamed when the rules finally do catch up. And before we go any further with this video, I do want to give a quick shout out and a quick mention to this week's video sponsor, who is Beeline Moto. So much of this story is about where bikes are being used, how they're being used, and whether riders are staying on the right side of the line. The Beeline Moto is a simple motorcycle navigation device that gives you clear directions without sticking another massive screen on your handlebars. I personally love it and use it because it keeps things nice and simple. You can plan proper routes on the app, follow those routes, and keep your phone tucked away out of sight, not distracting you in your pocket. And if you're doing road rides or back lane loops, or just trying to enjoy the bike with your own thoughts, then this is the kind of bit of kit that makes riding feel easier. There's a link in the description below if you want to go check them out and support the channel, because if you do decide to pull the trigger on one of these and buy one, well, they will pay me a small bit of commission, and I can keep then making these free to view videos for you. Anyway, back to KTM, because we need to be clear. they are denying any wrongdoing. They say reporting is based on a misunderstanding and that all KTM, Husqvarna and Gas Enduro models leave the factory in a compliant and homologated condition. They say conversions are only done after purchase and at the customer's request. And they say customers are warned that road approval expires after that conversion. And that is KTM's position on all this. And until regulators complete investigations, we cannot say KTM has broken any laws. This is not a proven Dieselgate scandal, but it is serious enough that authorities and riders should be paying attention to this story. Now, I could already hear some of you saying that this is just anti-bike nonsense, and maybe part of the environmental reporting just doesn't bother you because it's just more green-leaning, just stop oil woke rubbish. But like I've already said, the reputational damage this could have is massive. Motorcycles often get treated like an easy target. We are small in numbers, we're visible, and we're noisy. And politicians love going after things that look like a quick win. They will say that motorcycling as an industry cannot be trusted. And once that story takes hold, it will not just affect KTM's Enduro line of bikes, it will affect absolutely every single one of us. And this is a lesson that I keep coming back to. The motorcycle industry keeps acting like it can survive just on vibes and heritage, freedom and noise, performance and rebellion. And I love absolutely all of that. That is part of what makes motorcycling brilliant and enjoyable. But you cannot build a serious future on the attitude of, don't worry, mate, everyone does it. That attitude is exactly why motorcycling gets pushed further to the edges. If we want bikes to be taken seriously as transportation, as sport, as culture, as recreation, the industry needs to stop leaving us as riders exposed. If they think the rules are stupid, well, they should challenge them openly instead of just cheating them. Don't just create a workaround and hope that nobody asks questions. So I'm going to leave you with this. Could motorcycling have its own Dieselgate on the horizon? I personally don't think so. Not in the same way that Volkswagen did. Not at the same scale anyway. And it's not proven at this stage. But could this become a major trust problem for KTM and the wider Enduro or even motorcycle market? Absolutely. The real question is whether the bikes a customer thinks they're buying is the bike that the paperwork says that they're buying. If those two things don't match up at all, the rider deserves to know. Because once again, it is the rider who may end up paying the price here. So if you own an Enduro bike, especially a KTM, a Husqvarna or a Gas, I'd genuinely like to hear from you guys. Were you told what was road legal and what was competition only when you were buying that bike? And were you told what it meant for your insurance? Drop your experiences in the comments. And if you want more videos digging into stories behind the motorcycle industry, then please do consider checking out this one up here, where I delve a little bit further into the Chinese invasion of the European motorcycle market. And if you're new here, or even a returning viewer who makes up part of my 89% of returning viewers who have not yet subscribed, then please do subscribe by clicking my face down here in the round circle. It doesn't cost you a penny, so why won't you do it? Ride safe, and hopefully I get to see you all in the next one.